Hi, I'm Juliet. I'll be joining the Love Letters and Books podcast on Thursdays with my Lavender Library episodes interviewing authors about their stories, characters, and inspirations.
Welcome to Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. This is a soft space to explore romance in books where no topic is too taboo. I'm your host, Casey, and this week I'm sitting down with Juliet of the Lavender Library. She is a dear friend of mine and one of my favorite people to talk about books with. And I hope you all enjoy this episode because you're going to be hearing a lot more from Juliet on this podcast. So Juliet, as awkward as this is and as giggly as you and I are both about to be, I would like to say welcome to the Love Letters and Books podcast. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
How about you introduce yourself to the audience and maybe give a little insight into how we met?
Casey and I met in a workplace, and we found out kind of quickly that we had a good bit in common. One really big thing that we had in common is we were both readers. And so we would have these monthly meetings that were about marketing and really honing in on skills and just talking about how we market a podcast. We were working in medical media and podcasting. And from that, we started talking about personal projects. We have been talking about podcasts about books, and that's something obviously we both are really passionate about. And so from those conversations kind of came the Love Letters and Books podcast, and then also a personal podcast that I've been working on called the Lavender Library. And so, yeah, this feels like a long time coming, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to finally be doing it.
I know, it's so strange, and I love how formal we're being, and we're gonna just, devolve into giggles in about, 10 minutes, but that's okay. We're gonna try to set them up with some level of professionalism. But no, I loved it, and I loved all the conversations we had about books because in my personal life, I really don't have anyone I can talk to about books. Like, a little bit my sister, but we don't 100% have the same interests, and I really felt like I'm gobbling up books. I'm reading almost 200 books a year and I have no one to talk to about them. And so it was such a great experience to have that with you. And I remember the book that we connected on because you had told me you were in a reading slump. And I was like, girl, I got you. And I was like, there's this book called Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman, and I think it's going to resuscitate you. I mean, that was a pretty good recommendation, right? If you're coming out of a reading slump.
Oh, yeah, I devoured that book in, maybe 24 hours, maybe less, and then I had to read every other book by Jennifer Hartman immediately after. So, yeah, that
Immediately.
that worked.
It was so great to connect about that, and it was so much fun to be able to just discuss all the nuances of the books that we love and to share so many suggestions. So when I started this podcast, I really wanted to carve out a space so that we could do more episodes that you would be hosting and bring in all of the books and authors that you've been loving. So I'm thrilled that you're doing this, and my hope is that you'll take that Thursday slot and kind of just run with it.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that, and this is such a nice space for discussing everything about stories. I think specifically thinking about the Jennifer Hartman books, those books are not light books, they're super heavy, and even just that we were able to read and talk about them in such a nice, safe way while also, fangirling about how swoon-worthy the romance was, but also, unpacking the horrific things that these characters were going through. I think that translates so well into the podcast so far, so I'm really, really excited to be a part of that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I felt like I really needed a space in my own life where I could just dive deep into the happily ever after energy. And that's not all the books I read. I love horror. I love some tragedies, but there's definitely been this space of happily ever after that I definitely needed based on what was going on in real life. And I just needed some really good stories that could kind of pull through the trauma and all the things that people go through, but know that everything would turn out okay in the end. And creating a space where we get to sit down with our favorite authors and talk about all of their ideas, all of the nuances in the books, all of the characters. I just really felt compelled to do that. So I'm glad that we're both doing it together.
Me too. Yeah, I feel like every time I finish a book, I have 1,000 questions for the author, and I leave my little Goodreads reviews, but I'm like, that's not really having a conversation. Like, who can I talk to about this and how this happened and why these characters did what they did? And like you said, I love a happily ever after, but I also love when books and you're like, what just happened? And that's where I feel like you can have some really great conversations too.
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking about all of the other reasons why we're so attracted to reading. And I was thinking about, like, in my own life, what need does it fill or what does it offer? And I was really curious about that for you because when we initially talked about the Lavender Library, we had talked about LGBTQ literature and why that was important. And I wanted to check in with you and hear about what impact that had in your life and why you want to share that with readers and listeners.
Like I said, I've always been an avid reader, but I was kind of traditionally reading stories that I didn't feel represented in. I would relate to characters. I was big into the Twilight Saga. I was big into a bunch of those fantasy novels that I loved, and I related to the characters on some level. But when I came out, I kind of felt like I have no idea how to find books that I really feel represent me. And also, I feel like coming out, it's this big learning experience because you're stepping into a community that you maybe weren't part of before or you don't have a lot of information about and you don't really know the history of. So I felt like I was looking for stories where I could learn about this community, but also just see myself because I always loved reading to escape, but also reading to find characters I could relate to, even in fantastical settings and situations. And I really didn't know where to start. And I had a friend who had come out about a year before me, and she immediately sent me like a list of 10 or so books that she was like, I felt the exact same way as you. I didn't know where to start. You have a harder time knowing where to look for LGBT stories. And she was like, this is where I would start. These authors are excellent. And that really helped me. And that's kind of where I got inspiration for the podcast because I was like, I feel that that's a common thing where people come out and they're looking for stories that they can feel connected to and they're looking for stories where they see themselves. And yeah, it could be hard to know where to start sometimes. So that's what I'm kind of hoping to do with this podcast to have a starting point.
I love that you shared that because it's very easy to look at reading and think, oh, yes, we just want to be entertained. But I feel like there's so much more to it. And very often on this podcast, even in my work as a therapist, I would talk about the power of storytelling and relatability and being able to access the emotions of something without navigating the consequences and how that can
Mhm.
help us put ourselves into something and say, how would I show up in that? How would I move in that? How would I respond or react? Do I like that? Did I not know I like that? Am I scared of that? Is that my biggest fear? All of these things are offered to us in storytelling. And I feel like it's this extra powerful experience versus film, let's say, because you're having this image put in front of you and you're very passive. I almost feel like with reading, it just taps into that level of creativity where you're just imagining everything as you're maybe I just do that. I think everyone does that, but I feel
I
like
do as
you're just
well.
you're building this whole world in your head and you're imagining the characters a certain way, the setting a certain way. And it just offers you that opportunity to tap into that space inside yourself, but then also to tap into those emotions. And I was thinking as we were prepping for this episode, what has my reading journey been? And looking back, I can kind of laugh because I grew up and the rule in my house was if you want to read a fun book, you have to read two smart books. Meaning, if I wanted to get my Sweet Valley High book, which is what I grew up reading as a kid, I had to read a book about history or a book about science. That was the rule in my house. And of course, it's not lost on me that I grew up reading Sweet Valley High and I moved to Southern California for my Southern California Barbie dream life. So that made a lot of sense. But then as I got older, I thought about the things that I was attracted to and how they almost reflected my journey as an adult, whether it was with trauma, grief, loss, uncertainty, all of those things, and how I would gravitate towards books where I could process some of those emotions that might have been too difficult to deal with in real life. So very often I tell people that one of my favorite books is a Wally Lamb book called She's Come Undone. And I felt like that just taught me so much about trauma, honoring your experience, not needing to get it signed off on by the people around you, having it be a real thing, and your journey being a little more complicated sometimes than other people's, and what that looks like. And also that the story's not over when we think it is. And I feel like I read that story at a really pivotal time in my life. I was probably like 19, and I know that in all the years since, I've definitely reflected on it. And then I think about what I'm reading now, right? All the stories I'm reading and just like all I'm getting from it. So when I say that, is there some book or an author that you feel really speaks to your own personal journey, whatever that is?
I think, like you said, it's evolved a lot over time. For me at the beginning, when I was coming out and the books that I needed to read then, I read Her Name in the Sky by Kelly Quinlan. That felt like the first time I saw myself wholly on a page, and it was not necessarily exactly what I was going through. Like, the book revolves around 2 girls in a Catholic school, but the emotions in that book just felt so raw, and afterwards, I was literally shaking when I finished it, and I was talking to my friend at the time, and they're like, "Okay, so I guess you hated it," and I was like, "No, I loved it. I loved it so much. It brought something out of me that made me literally have a panic attack," but I think it was because I had felt so seen, and it was all the good and the bad that I had been feeling and the confusion and the fear, but also it was really cathartic, and in the end, it is a happy ending, so you feel hopeful in the end too, and I feel like now, for some reason, I've started to really get into, like, horror and especially, like, in queer narratives, like, really just
Come to the
traumatizing
dark
horror.
side.
Yeah. And I don't know why I'm so drawn to that now, but right now, everything in me wants to read horror and darkness, and I'm in a really good place in my life, and yet, for some reason, I feel like I'm maybe processing things that have happened to me that I didn't process before through horror, and it's just interesting. I wouldn't expect that to be what I'm drawn to at this stage of my life.
I love hearing that. And I think that as someone who loves horror, and I've said before, I'm the original final girl, which is a whole story I should probably write a book about. But I love it. And I do get something out of it too, because in my own life, I will say I had some pretty horrific experiences. And I don't know what it is about that. The facts aren't the same. Sometimes the feelings are very similar, but I also just love it. I love the journey it takes you on. And I love hearing about who survives in the end and how they get away with it. I don't know what it is, but I read this book recently called Slashed, and it's by Talia Sanchez. I hope I'm getting it right. But it's about this girl who goes into a scare house with all of her friends, and there's a scare actor in there, and she's like, "Oh my God, he's so scary." And she's like, "Oh my God, the blood looks so real. Oh my God, these people are screaming so authentically." And she doesn't realize he's actually a murderer and he's killing everyone in the house. And she like bursts through the door at the end as the final girl, and she's like, "I'm gonna win a prize." And the police are there. They're like, "How did you get out of this house alive?" And I was just like, that's what it feels like to be a teenage girl, by the way.
Yes,
But do you know what I'm saying?
absolutely.
Like, you navigate the horrors and you come out on the other end, but I love those books. I'm a huge horror fan. So, Juliet, I have about a million recommendations for you if you haven't seen my TikToks or Instagrams lately.
I will take any and all recommendations.
I talked about it with Foster because, he's always asking, like, what kind of books do you like? And I'm like, I just want like a corn maze and an axe murderer with a hockey mask. Like, that'll be the plot, and I'll feel really good about it. And it's funny, obviously, I read everything, and,
Mhm.
we're just talking about this right now, but there's something about it. And I always feel a little embarrassed, to be honest with you, when people ask what I like to read, because it happens a lot at work. We're warming up, we chit chat, people are asking about what you're interested in. And I'm always like, well, I'm really into reading horror. And people are like, "What, like Dracula?" I'm like, "Yeah, like Dracula." Like, a
Sure.
little bit like that. But I just think about my favorite movies, and I built the drive-in movie theater in the backyard, and so
Mhm.
we've been taking full advantage of it, but Friday the 13th is, like, my favorite movie, second only to the original Halloween. Like, I am this scream queen. Like, I love those films, so I'm just so glad you're joining me in your horror phase.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I read a book recently called We Used to Live Here, which was this like spooky book about a couple who moves into a house and this family shows up and says, "We used to live here. Can we look inside?" And then they never leave. And as the book goes on, the protagonist starts to lose her grip on reality and people around her start to forget who she is. And it like has stuck with me so clearly. And I feel like it's like I don't know if it's, like, the horror of losing everything and everyone you love and being forgotten. Maybe that's what intrigues me, and that's something that I'm processing right now, but it was so powerful for me. It, like, stuck with me for some reason that I was like, "Yeah, this is exactly what it's like in my life right now." This, like, weird family coming in and being like, "Yeah, this is my life now. We live here now."
Yeah, no, I love that you're saying that. And like it does bring a lot to the surface. And I feel like again, it's very easy to dismiss things, but it's like not everything has to be factual to be relatable. I think about the books that I really love, and I'm sure each of us has a list of our favorite books that we tell people are our favorite books. And then we have a secret list in a hidden folder in our mind that is actually our comfort list of books. And I've been pretty forthcoming on this podcast that The Sinner by Chantal Tessier is my comfort book. And everyone's like, are you okay? Are you sure you're okay? That is a very dark book. I'm like, I don't know. It's just like healed childhood wounds. Like I read that book and I remember explaining to my sister, I was like, you know, all that trauma that we experienced, all of that? She's like, yeah, like it's gone. I don't know what that book did. It like wiped the slate clean and I feel refreshed. Like
Mhm.
it's pretty dark. So do you have one book from your like hidden super secret list? A favorite book or like a healing book that you like almost probably wouldn't share with anyone. So I'm going to ask you about it on a podcast.
That's such a good question. I feel like if I was gonna keep coming back to a book, it's actually a YA book. Not that there's anything wrong with YA, but this book I read when I was in college, it was called The Raven Boys, and it's found family, a bunch of teenagers in the woods. They're looking for this Welsh king, and it's just about their adventure, and they all have these traumas, and they all come together. That book to me when I was a kid, I think the found family of it I always come back to because it felt like a very natural found family and just all of these different experiences that they were having and they would come together and they would just on this adventure together. Something about that was so comforting to me. And there was also, queerness woven throughout it too. And they just released a graphic novel version of this book and I revisited it recently and I was like, wow, this holds up for me. It's struck a chord with me as a kid and now even as an adult I'll go back to that story and there's just something striking in it for me.
Oh, I love that you shared that because it does bring up the thing of like, what chord does it strike, even if it doesn't feel like it might be the direct thing that helps or heals. And I always think for me, the author who generally does that is Penelope Douglas. And it's
Mhm.
so funny because people always say, oh, like taboo queen, like she writes all of these books that are notorious. I'm like, well, yes, there's definitely that. But her characters definitely get up to hijinks, and there's tons of trauma, there's tons of found family, there's a lot of healing. And one of the things that she does so beautifully is she highlights the experience of arrested development due to trauma and how it's so misinterpreted in the world. Like, no one talks about it. No one talks about how when you experience childhood trauma, you're actually robbed of certain experiences. You're robbed of organic evolution. You're almost thrust into knowledge that no adult should have, but you have as a younger person, and you have no context. You don't have the survival skills, you don't have the agency. And I love that she talks about that because basically that's my life story. And so when she talks about it and she does it with so much compassion, and even if the stories are really difficult, they get there. And these people get their happy endings and they get to repair things or move through things or grow together. And it's something that's so attractive. Like the Devil's Night series, I'll never get sick of that series. I think once, like a few years ago, I told you that's my like deserted island series. It's all about child abuse and very different
Mhm.
forms of it for each character, but how they move through it. And I think about some of her other books too, like Tristix's Venom or Five Brothers. Like they're really highlighting all of these things. It just offers you the opportunity to have a healing experience that you may not get in real life. Like in real life, your perpetrator is not going to apologize to you or go to prison.
Mhm.
You're not going to get to kick their ass, like none of that stuff's going to happen. They're just going to live and their life is going to be fine. Something, it's almost infuriating. And so I feel like books offer you that opportunity to almost like ride the wave of revenge or healing or something like that.
And especially Penelope Douglas, I feel like I read Tristix's Venom and loved it, and what I really also appreciate about her writing is the characters are so messy, and they're so not perfect, and they're so deeply flawed, and I felt like I was seeing a lot of criticism going into reading those books that, like, these characters are too cruel and too mean, and they lash out at each other, and, like, the relationships are so toxic, and, I really appreciate books that let characters be messy and have human emotions, and I feel like that's so often something that we have to button up and, that you don't always get to, like, scream at someone that you are angry at. Like, you have to kinda just swallow it down and keep moving. I love when authors let their characters be wrong and make mistakes, even really bad ones, even really, like, almost unforgivable mistakes that you learn more about them and you come to understand why they do what they do. I feel like a lot of readers sometimes kind of shy away from that, but I think it's so honest. And I feel like the more we read about that, the more maybe we can be a little easier on ourselves. And I definitely have seen myself and like the ugly parts of myself in these characters. And I just really appreciate when authors let characters be messy and wrong.
Oh my God, let's talk about that for a second because it's one of my favorite things. And I also feel like that's part of the experience for me, always talking from the eye, of reading. Because in life, we all have to be pretty buttoned up. I don't know about you. I don't get to like throw refrigerators at people and say whatever I think and make mistakes. I mean, that is not how my life functions. And it wouldn't. Somebody could say, well, then do that stuff. It's like, that's not really realistic either. So I feel like these are opportunities to see what would happen if you messed up. And I feel like it's great because it allows you to step away from perfectionism for a moment. Even if you can in your real life, you can in the book, right? Like, I don't get to be emotionally messy in my life, but I would love to. Honestly, let's just talk about that for a second. I think in my dream scenario, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, it's come up a lot this year, and I've talked about it a lot with my brother in law and my partner. Of all the things I regret, I was like, I wish I had just lost it a few times. Like, that's what I
Mhm.
regret. I actually almost regret being so, like, understanding and compassionate and grace-filled, Like, there's moments where I'm like, "I really should have thrown a chair at that person," and I honestly think it would have been for their best selves. Like, they would have healed because I did that. So, that's just me saying that, like, in my mind, I think about that, and so when these books offer the opportunity to be released from perfectionism, sometimes that's what we're looking for, and it doesn't have to be the literal experience, right? Tristix's Venom, those girls were getting wild. They were being horrific to each other, and I'm like, amazing. Imagine being so torn up inside, so full of grief, so full of sadness that you can act out a little bit and then heal those wounds together and it's not held against you for the rest of your life. In fact, you're loved because you're your honest self. And it doesn't mean we should experience horrific behavior in real life because I always come back to this. It's a book, it's not real life. But it gives you that opportunity, like I said, to sort of detach from the consequences and to process how you would feel in that experience. So I love that. I actually think it's really healing.
There's another book series, the Locked Tomb series, which is like my favorite series of all time that explores that. And it's these two girls who have been through horrific trauma and they're awful to each other. And it's a horror book, it's a sci fi horror book. And even through all of this horror, the whole series is about hope and love and how you come through that and how you heal from that and the relationships that are there when you do. And you're not trying to just push it down and pretend like everything's fine. And I love books like that, and I feel like a discussion I see a lot with those books is, well, when are we glorifying doing the wrong thing or abuse or violence, and when are we exploring it? And I think that that's an interesting and nuanced question, but I feel like when we shy away from it too much, we're missing out on something that could be really healing. And like you said, it's a book, and you can see how things may have played out if you had made different choices in your life, or, you get to do things that you wouldn't be able to do in your life, and you see these characters do them, and that could be healing. And I do think there could be a fine line, and I understand both sides of the debate, but I just think it's interesting and healing for me personally to read about these things, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything that's happening. I don't think I need to, and I think that that's still there's value in that.
Oh, I love that you just said that, not agreeing with it. Like, I don't need to agree with it to think it's a good story. And I feel
Mhm.
like part of that is really important because my friend Dan once said something to me like, if I asked you to write down a list of every single thing that you wanted in your life, and I checked back in with you a few years down the line, you would have sold yourself short because you can't even see what's coming. Like, you can't even
Mhm.
imagine the possibilities. And so when I think about reading and experiences, like, I actually want experiences that go beyond where I let my mind go, because I also wanna be taken on the healing journey that can go farther than my mind can go. So,
Yes.
like, that book, Still Beating, was trauma, like, the entire first part of the book was so hard, but then the healing journey was so profound, and I kept thinking, like, you and I actually talked about that, and I remember talking about it thinking, like, one of the most powerful things about that story is trauma can be very isolating. Yes,
Mhm.
sometimes we are traumatized with other people, but a lot of us have private trauma, and so the fact that they were together was really powerful because that's something that when you're going through things, you feel completely alone, and you feel like you'll be alone forever. So, one, that was powerful, but then their healing required so much. And at every stage of the healing journey, I remember having a little bit of anxiety, thinking like, "Oh, he's gonna give up. He's gonna leave. He's gonna do something else because this healing is requiring so much. It's too messy." And so the story and the trauma was really messy and over the top, and the healing got to be a little messy and over the top too. And the message there is also really helpful. Like, it's not too much when you need to heal. And it made me reflect on my own journey and experience with trauma, and how at every stage throughout my life, I was really asked to just minimize it, package it up, and move on so that I don't make anyone else uncomfortable. And part of that book and why it was so uncomfortable was because their trauma touched everyone. It was messy, it was loud, it destroyed everything. And I needed that story. And I didn't
Mhm.
know I needed that story. So I really just went on a tangent, but I was very inspired by what you said about, like, I don't need to agree with it to feel like it's a really good story. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's like you said, that's a great example where the characters were making mistakes after, and like you said, they were loud and they were messy, and it was such a major, huge, horrific, over the top thing that happened to them that I feel like it just was like, "Oh, this is maybe not the healthiest, but it is how I kinda wish that I was able to process trauma." Like, I wish that I had been able to be like, "This is insane. Can you even wrap your head around what happened to me?" And to just be loud about it, and I feel like, again, that's so cathartic when you're reading to be able to experience that even if it's just through the story.
One of the most powerful things in stories, and I'm thinking particularly about that book, but I'm thinking of other characters as well, when the author gives you the gift of being annoyed with someone. So
Yes.
I think about Still Beating, and the sister is like an iconic character because you just want to, she's just drives you crazy. She has no empathy, no compassion, no understanding. And in real life, we have people like that. When you're experiencing trauma and healing and going through things, you have people who say the wrong thing, who loudly, aggressively, repeatedly say the wrong thing, and you just don't have the energy to fight with them. And so that book offered you that. It offered you the opportunity to have those emotions and process them with almost a proxy because you don't get to do it in real life. And I feel like that's the gift of these stories. And man, I think that we both have those writers that really offer that for us. And yeah, there's books you read, they're just like guilty pleasures, but then you
Mhm.
have those books that really help with those big emotions. And I don't know, maybe you and I are not going through the same things, but same, but different, like processing certain things that are going on. And I feel like so many emotions have been coming to the surface the last few years, even with things I thought I was okay with. And they have been revisited without my consent. They've like risen to the surface, and it's been really interesting to, I don't know, to have reading as that outlet to process some of those emotions, because I actually don't know if I'm supposed to be processing it with the person or the people or the situation. I really feel like books give that to you. They give you the opportunity to experience those emotions. And I think about that too. I don't know if you had this experience. You'd mentioned YA earlier,
Mhm.
right? And so even if we're not talking about like YA books, but you're talking about books that are talking about younger characters. And I always think to myself, like, why am I so attracted to those stories? Like, what does that offer me? I'm like, oh, I had such a difficult time in my life. Like, I almost died when I was 23. I wasn't like lighthearted and having fun and up to hijinks. Like, I was
Right.
really struggling internally. Like, even if externally everything looked okay, internally I was having a hard time. And I think maybe that's the appeal of those stories. It's like that time in my life I never got to have. And it's like you get to kind of re experience it that way.
I totally think that, especially I feel like when you come out, they say a lot of times like LGBT people go through like a second puberty because all of these feelings that you had to repress for a long time, at least in my experience, because I came out later in life, you're getting to experience them for the first time. And you kind of get to experience a lot of things over again, like a first kiss. And that kind of thing feels new. And so I think that's why I'm definitely drawn to stories with like younger characters because I'm experiencing things that I didn't get to experience, but I get to see how they move through it and think about how maybe I would have been able to process that if I had the experiences that they're having. And I do feel like it's kind of living vicariously through them a little bit. That's what that brought up when you said that.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, one of the things that's been so confronting for me in my reading journey, right, of like 200 books a year, it brings a lot to the surface. But one of the things is watching the miscommunication trope and how it has driven sort of like book talk crazy, right? People, it's like one of the most talked about things, but thinking about, oh God, I am the walking embodiment of the miscommunication trope, which is interesting because I'm quite the communicator, but I also keep things so close to my chest that are really important to me. And I really feel like at certain points in my life, I've very much presented one thing to the world and lived a very different life. And so it's been really helpful and very healing to read books where you think to yourself, oh, that did impact that person. Oh, that did prevent them from having these experiences or being in touch with these emotions or experiencing these opportunities. Like, it's not just, yeah, 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 that affected me. It's like, no, it really did block them from that. And it's been this deeper level of awareness, which is probably embarrassing to announce, especially since I used to be a therapist and help other people with this. But it's very different when you're working with other people than when you're dealing with your own stuff. I can promise you that. And so I was thinking about there's this one series called the Edge of Darkness trilogy by Lee Rivers. And I read that a few years ago when it first came out, and it just blew my mind, the trauma that these people experience and how they could not share it with other people. They could not tell anyone about it. That was how traumatized they were. They just couldn't. And getting through the day was just survival. And it really brought a lot to the surface. And it really made me reflect on, well, how much of your life is spent that way? And how
Mhm.
could it have been different? And as frustrated as we get with the miscommunication trope, right? You hear about it all the time. It's not something that actually particularly bothers me because I think I have a lot of empathy for it. But you see people get really frustrated with it. And I'm like, it's because it's so common, because it happens in our real life, because we're not getting what we need from other people in conversation, or we're holding that one thing back. And I feel like it's reflecting something that maybe we're very uncomfortable with. That happens a lot.
I also love the miscommunication trope. I know I'm probably in the minority, but I
Just
kind of
you and
think
me.
yeah, I don't know. There's something about it that's so like I know exactly where this is headed. But I think it's taught me also, I kind of like you said, it's taught me to think about things in the way that I'm communicating. And it's just funny how even a trope like that, it affects how I interact with people on the outside because I'll think of a story with a miscommunication trope and I'm like, it's so frustrating to be like, if you had just said this, like you could have been together earlier. You could have like had the dream that you wanted or like and so I feel like I do think back to that a lot. I don't know if you do this, but if I'm faced with like something that I am struggling with or I'm trying to figure out what I need to do, I do think back to books and I'm like, well, this character did this at that point, and like these were the consequences of that action. So maybe I'm going to avoid doing that. And that feels crazy to say because these are fictional worlds, but I do feel like, I don't know, I learn a lot of lessons from it. And the miscommunication trope, that's a big one that I love reading about.
It's interesting because anyone could misinterpret what we just said, right? Like it's
Yes.
very easy to misinterpret that and be like, you read fiction and it helps you. But, let's take a step back. Bruno Bettelheim, that was like the basis of his work, is he wrote this book called The Uses of Enchantment. And everything about it is about how fairy tales and the things we tell children, all the storytelling, how it helps us problem solve and how it impacts things. And I think about Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote that book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves. And it's all about storytelling and how powerful that is as women, and how, as we've become detached from it, we've almost lost some of those lessons and how important that is. I had this beautiful interview with Rhea Morris Edwards, and she was talking about that and how important storytelling is for women's safety,
Mhm.
because we need to share those stories about who's a danger, what was this experience like. And when we're cut off from that, or we're told it's silly or there's no benefit to it, I mean, we're cutting ourselves off from connecting through stories. Like, are we only supposed to be in the harsh reality of life all the time? Why do we talk about that with books, but it doesn't come up with music or movies or art? Mostly, I think it's because if you're talking about romance or happily ever afters, you're talking about women predominantly, right? And so, super easy to pick on anything that women like or get happiness or learn from. It's very easy to attack it. And so that's why I feel like I love having this podcast and being able to talk about all of these things and talk about what I'm getting from these stories and what I imagine other
Mhm.
people are getting. I was talking with an author, and her debut novel was about domestic violence. And I remember thinking as I was reading the book, you're going to change someone's life because you were talking about domestic violence in the way that gets swept under the rug. You were
Mhm.
talking about the domestic violence that if we tell someone in our families, sometimes they're saying, it's not that bad. You're making a big deal. And it's like you put that on a page in a book, someone's going to read that. And it's the first time in their life that they'll be affirmed that, yeah, this is dangerous, or this could escalate, or I deserve something better. Like my life needs an upgrade. I need safety. That's not something I want to bargain with. And so that's why I love talking about these books and stories very much
Yeah.
because of that.
And I feel like that's why I'm a big proponent of, like, I know why people say, like, well, this wasn't my experience, so then it must not be right. Or, I see that a lot with these imperfect characters who are like, well, I would never have reacted that way, so that must be wrong. And I just think writing about everything and where no subject is too taboo could help someone who is maybe seeing what they're feeling and what they're experiencing for the first time ever. And people obviously have different experiences, but the more perspectives that we have and the more perspectives we read, the more maybe we help someone heal or find something that makes them feel like they're not alone and they can help themselves.
Oh, and how triggering is it when you read something and it's like someone is screaming your secret thoughts?
Yes.
And your first instinct is, I have to shut the book. I've got to shut that person down. I remember when I met my friend David, and he'll never listen to this podcast, so I'm so excited to talk about this. But I met my friend David because I was taking a yoga class. It was a free class, a volunteer ran it, and the volunteer didn't show up. And I just came to this class thinking it's like at 9 o'clock at night. I'm going to kick back in the back row. No one's going to know that I'm here. I'm just going to zone out. And the instructor didn't show up, and some loudmouth raised their hand and be like, Casey's the yoga instructor. She can teach the class. And so I had to get up and teach the class. And we would always circle up and talk afterwards. That was part of the structure of the class. And David, who I'd never met before, he had a flower tucked behind his ear. He's sobbing hysterically. And he's just rambling about all of this inner pain and turmoil and confusion, all of these things going on in his life. And I remember as I'm sitting there post leading this yoga class thinking, I want to punch him in the face because I felt like he was telling my story. Like there was nothing coming out of his mouth that I wasn't dealing with that day specifically. Like it was all of my anxiety and stress and fear. And he was just like crying and being loud about it. And I was like, "Ooh," you want to like shut that person up. And so when I think about these stories and how we're touching on so many topics, right, that we're almost programmed to not say out loud. We're not supposed to talk about trauma. We're just supposed to get over it. You're not supposed to like heal or, it's just supposed to happen and then you're done with it, right? Like that's almost how the world tells us we
Mhm.
need to navigate it. And so when people are being taken on an uncomfortable journey and they are deeply inconvenient and they say the wrong thing and they do the wrong thing and there's still grace and forgiveness and opportunity and they haven't destroyed everything because they had a bad day, a week, month, a year, I feel like it's really powerful. And I just think back to that. I think about that experience with David all the time. It was like my entire life was in neon above his head in just this like constant CNN banner. And he was just spilling all of my secrets. And it was really helpful to think about like, well, why am I being so reactive to this person, even internally?
Mhm.
Because he's saying the thing I don't feel like I can say out loud, and I have to kill him. No, I'm just kidding. It was like and I was just like, "David, what are you doing?" And so now he's my best friend. Well, on that note, tell me about some authors or books that you're reading that you're feeling really inspired by or passionate about. Yeah, I feel like I've always learned so much and been introduced to so many different books and genres from you, so give us some
Yeah.
of your recent ones.
I briefly touched on it earlier, but the Locked Tomb is really the world that I've been in for probably the past like 3 years. It was originally supposed to be a trilogy, and then the author was like, there's just so much more of this story to be told. Tamsin Muir is the author. I should have mentioned that. It's now going to be 4 books, and the last book, Electo the Ninth, was supposed to come out in, I think, 2023. And obviously now it's 2025, and there hasn't been any news aside from it's being written. So that is driving me absolutely insane. I am like on online forums dissecting these books. Like I am there's just so much to them and it's so interesting to unpack the relationships. Like we talked about again messy relationships and these messy characters and this world is also it's all female characters for the most parts and each one of them, there's like an deeply evil one who you also like are kind of rooting for and then there's this relationship between these two girls that they have traumatized each other but they're also like healing together in this relationship and I'm so excited to see where that goes and also it's very political and it's talking about climate change and the effects that we leave and how we leave the world better than we found it. So I just feel like I'm super engrossed in this series right now, and I literally yeah, you could find me on every online Locked Tomb forum, and I am dissecting this book line by line. I've listened to the audiobook. I've read the books probably like 50 times each, but I am obsessed with that world.
Oh my god, I need to join you there because I love that. I mean, you've obviously seen, I have 9,000,000 theories about the Lord series and the direction we're going in, and I have really blown up my notes app. In my defense, I will say in my defense, I was very sick all year, like very not in good health, and so when you're like in bed all the time, you're like, "Well, let me get some detective work going." I mean, I feel like that's a really natural thing to do. So I love that you admitted that you're like on all those boards and doing the deep dives because you are not alone in that. I definitely join you there. So I love that you mentioned that series. And now I'd love to just check in with what can we expect in your episodes? Because my hope is that, like I said earlier, you'll take that Thursday slot and be doing love letters and books, Lavender Library episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. Am really excited about that. I think you can expect more conversations with authors, hopefully, unpacking a lot of the books that I'm reading and the books I'm excited about. A lot of it will be LGBT literature, which I'm super interested in. And I love the idea that of just being a starting point where if you're looking to get into LGBT literature, like here are the stories that are out there, here are the authors a safe space to talk to authors about their writing process and creativity and why they're telling the stories that they're telling now. Or if it's, a book that isn't as recent, like why they felt like that was the story that they wanted to tell then.
I love that. And I think it's really important to have these conversations and hear from authors about what has inspired them, what they put in there, what decisions they made. I find it so interesting. I've loved doing this podcast, and I'm so excited that we're going to keep going and interview more people and have them come back for their next books. Like, I feel like that's been really exciting to be on the journey with some of these authors. So I'm really looking forward to it. Well, Juliet, as you know, one of the core aspects of this podcast is that everyone who comes on writes and reads a love letter either to their younger self, to their readers, maybe to a character. So you don't get a free pass. I'm going to invite you to share your love letter with us so we can get to know you just a little bit more.
Absolutely. So I wrote a letter to my younger self, and specifically around the time that I was kind of talking about, where I came out and was exploring this new world. So this is what I had written. Dear younger Juliet, I know how confusing and frightening it feels to step into the world just after coming out. The air feels heavier, and sometimes you'll wonder if you'll ever breathe easily again. But the fear won't last forever. Books and art will become your companions, your safe spaces. In their pages and colors, you'll find pieces of yourself reflected back, and you'll start to build the courage to live more fully. They'll guide you towards your voice, your style, your joy. There are better days ahead than you can imagine right now. You'll grow into someone who doesn't just survive but thrives. There will be laughter, deep love, and a community that sees you exactly as you are. So be gentle with yourself. The world is bigger and kinder than it feels in this moment, and you will find your place in it.
I love the love letter aspect of this because I feel like there's so much resonance with what people are writing to themselves. And you just always think about yourself at different stages in life and how much meaning this would have had for you. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you. I love this portion of the podcast. I think this is so special.
It's so funny because it's the thing I'm most self-conscious about. And I had an
Really?
author the other day tell me, and she was like, you have to not be self-conscious when you mention that during the pre-production call. She's like, because we're all into it. We all write. So this
Yeah.
is right up our alley. And I think about that, like why that is self-conscious, but I feel like I'm asking people to do something or I'm asking for a part of them. Maybe they're not ready to share, but everyone's been really
Mhm.
open about it. So I feel like it's been nice to get to know people that way. Well, I am so glad that I got to spend this time with you. I can't wait till you come back and I can't wait for your episodes. So, Juliet, thanks for joining us. And to everyone listening, you can look forward to Juliet's episodes, which will be Love Letters and Books, Lavender Library, and they'll be coming out on Thursdays. Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can find me on both Instagram and TikTok at Love Letters and Books. And if you're interested in being a guest on Love Letters and Books, suggesting your favorite author, or just want to write in an original love letter to yourself or someone else to be read on air, please send me an email at lovelettersandmixtapes@gmail.com.